Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have responded to a US-backed proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's in Doha to discuss the response with Qatari mediators. A senior political analyst. He's joining us by Skype from Paris. As Osama was just explaining there, we don't have a lot of details about what's at the centre of these proposals. Hamas has made its response, essentially restating a position that it's held right from the start. We seem to have a lack of enthusiasm within Israel as well. The only people that seem to be really pushing this are the US. Are we any closer to where we are, say, several months ago with regard to these negotiations?
Well, Rob, the US is pushing its own proposal. It's not pushing for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. The US is pushing its own proposal, which has been contrary to what the international community wanted for 8 months, but was forced to accept the American diktats because otherwise the war would have continued to grind on and kill hundreds of Palestinians every week, if not every day. So the US is basically pushing its own Pax Americana. And that's normal. That's what America does. America advances its interests. And this proposal is in the interest of the United States, is the interest of the Biden administration in an election year. And it's pushing it because, as you said, and I won't say reluctant, I think the Israelis want war. They've been saying it nonstop. I'm not sure why the rest of us can't understand what the Israeli government wants. The Israeli government wants war. It wants to destroy Hamas. I'm not sure what, I mean, the Americans give it excuses. I don't think the rest of us need to give the Israelis excuses. The Israeli government wants to continue with the war and destroy Hamas, period. New paragraph, right? Now, the Americans try to say, look, let's get some of the hostages out over 6 weeks, and then we will see. And why do I say we will see? And why Hamas continues to hammer on this point, and why the Palestinians are worried about this point, which is called moving from phase 1 to phase 2. This is the most important part and the biggest problem with this American proposal come UN Security Council Resolution 2735. And that's anything that will happen in phase 2, including Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, will only happen upon agreement of the parties. Upon agreement of the parties, which means, in simple English, Israel has a veto over phase 2, which means we could end up just with phase 1. Because if Israel doesn't like what Hamas is doing towards phase 2, Israel can continue with the war. And that's why yesterday, Israeli high officials told Reuters that this proposal, this resolution, will allow Israel, or could allow Israel, to achieve its war objectives.
Part of the problem is, if I understand it correctly, Marwan, is that we are back to talking about something that we were really talking about several months ago as well, which is the vagary of what those objectives actually are. We still don't know what Israel would consider as being a, in quotes, victory. The thing that they would be able to say, right, that's it, we're done. We have eradicated Hamas. And whilst one would imagine that remains vague, that allows an awful lot of maneuverability for Israel in terms of how it deals with these negotiations.
Look, I certainly agree with you on that. And I think within Israel itself, there's a bit of a nuance about what victory means. And by the way, for all practical purpose, General Gantz and General Eisenkot left the government or the war cabinet because they did not agree on the end game, right? What constitutes an Israeli victory? They did not agree with Netanyahu on that. I think the United States and Israel and the Netanyahu government don't agree about what the end game is, what constitutes an Israeli victory, or at least how to achieve it. For example, for the Americans, let's wind down the war. We can achieve our objective, Israeli-American objective, of finishing off Hamas and taking control of Gaza away from Hamas without necessarily killing 30,000 more Palestinians. That's what the Americans think. They continue to agree with the Israelis that Hamas can no longer control Gaza. They agree with the Israelis that if possible, Gaza must be demilitarized. They agree with the Israelis that Israel is defending its own security and will continue to defend its own security in Gaza, not that Israel is defending its occupation and its racist system of apartheid from the river to the sea. No. The Americans and the Israelis could think and argue that Israel is merely defending itself in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, not that it's defending its occupation. And there's a huge difference between the two. Now, the Israelis, at this point in time, this very narrow government or security cabinet that includes the likes of the radical fanatics, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, as well as some real fascists from the Likud party and Netanyahu, the godfather of all of this, want to defeat Hamas, want the end of Hamas in Gaza, like they tried to achieve the end of Hamas in the West Bank. They want to make sure that they all end up either dead or in jail or outside Gaza. They don't want any trace of Hamas in Gaza. And they would like to take control of a security zone or corridor of a mile long throughout from the north to the south, if possible, for years to come. They would like that. They would like to maintain control over all crossings and borders that Gaza has with the rest of the world, just as they do in the West Bank. So they want to maintain basically overall control of Gaza without Hamas. They will consider that achieving the war objectives.
And one of the things that I find interesting about all of this is that Hamas is focusing on, or appears to be focusing on, with regard to the ceasefire, the immediate problem of stopping the war within Gaza. But what it does not do is ultimately lead to what it had originally hoped for Palestinians, which was something akin to a two-state solution. Talk to us about what you think Hamas's thinking is at the moment with regard to the priorities that it has.
Well, certainly there has been a devolution in the Palestinian cause in the homeland for the past 30 years. We have gone from the idea of a two-state solution to the idea of a limited autonomy around Ramallah in the West Bank. And then we ended up with a split between Gaza and the West Bank. And of course, Jerusalem was annexed by the Israelis and blessed by the United States, including, unfortunately, by this administration, the Democratic administration, not just by the Trump administration. And now what the Palestinians are doing is no more than defending themselves. Believe it or not, neither Hamas, nor the Fatah, nor the PLO, nor the Palestinian Authority, nor any Palestinian party at this point in time is doing anything to liberate Palestine or to free Palestine from the Israeli occupation. What they've been doing now, at least since 2002, is merely defending themselves in Gaza and in Ramallah in the West Bank. The Palestinians have been in a mode of self-defense now for over 2 decades. The idea that they would struggle towards the freedom of the rest of the homeland, I think that has not been in the books for at least 2 decades, because they have been busy defending themselves. Israel has been busy maintaining its occupation, and they have been busy defending themselves. We have gone through, as you remember, Rob, and you and I have spoke about this over the years, Israel has launched 4 wars on Gaza. Hamas and Jihad and other groups within Gaza have been in a mode of self-defense, basically one war after another, trying to reconstruct whatever authority, whatever lives, whatever infrastructure they have for 20 years. That's what the Israelis called mowing the lawn, continuously destroying Palestinian infrastructure, continuously putting the Palestinians on defense. The price for the Palestinians has been so heavy, it's really culminated in this latest war, 8 months, because Israel has basically run with total impunity, one war after another, leading us to this war where the Israelis said, you know what, if the world doesn't care, if the Arab world doesn't give a damn, and if the United States is going to protect us, no matter what we do, no matter what war crimes we carry, no matter what genocide we effect in Gaza or in Palestine, well, we're going to do it. And that's the result of impunity. Israel is taking its revenge, its wrath on Gaza. And the result, I mean, I know we've been covering it, but why not just repeat again and again? Tens of thousands of Palestinian women and children and adults have been killed, more than 100,000 casualties. The entire Gaza Strip now is basically destroyed. Schools and hospitals and universities and clinics and bakeries and residential buildings. That's the result of this war. And after all of that, when the Palestinians were dying for a ceasefire for the past so many months, dying for a ceasefire, literally and figuratively, now comes Blinken to the region and lectures the Palestinians about a ceasefire. How surrealistic and absurd is this picture of the emissary of the United States, the imperial power that has been protecting, financing, and arming Israel to carry its genocide in Gaza, is lecturing the Palestinians and the Arabs out of the Dead Sea in Jordan about the importance of ceasefire, when the United States has been blocking the ceasefire for months now, when the Russians and the Chinese and even the French have been demanding a ceasefire, when the Arabs and the Palestinians have been demanding a ceasefire, and the United States has been blocking a ceasefire. Now they're going for a partial ceasefire, a pause for 6 weeks, and they're lecturing the rest of the region, and certainly the Palestinians, about the importance of a ceasefire.
I want to ask you about that issue of impunity that you brought up there. We're reporting that an independent UN investigation is now finding that Israel has committed crimes against humanity and war crimes. This is the first time that there has been an in-depth report into the war in Gaza. It is also accusing Palestinian armed groups of war crimes, particularly on October the 7th. With regard to the issue of impunity, are we now seeing, do you think, the first stages that will eventually lead to some sort of accountability for what's been happening?
Well, certainly the building blocks of accountability have been coming together, right? And clearly the pressure has really been building up, whether it's from the ICJ, the ICC, the UN Human Rights Council, the human rights organizations, and so on and so forth. So there's clearly a momentum there. And I think it's important to note that legally speaking, yes, and I'm no legal scholar, but I can certainly, with the simplest of logic and rationale, understand why the Human Rights Council and other groups such as the ICC would say both Hamas and Israel are carrying war crimes. Hamas's kidnapping of hostages, of civilians, is not illegal, despite Hamas's claim that it is. It is not. It is not to the spirit or letter of international humanitarian law. You cannot simply kidnap, hold hostages, civilians, and then basically stuff them in civilian population. Now, of course, the Palestinians say, under the circumstances of what we've gone through and so on and so forth, occupation, we are defending ourselves, and we have a right to resist. All that is true, but that does not justify a war crime. Now, having said that both Israel and Hamas are probably carrying, or arguably carrying, war crimes, there's politically, there's a big difference between the two. Legally, both, to the definition, are carrying war crimes. Politically, Hamas, Jihad, and other Palestinian groups are trying to liberate themselves and their land from decades-long occupation and dispossession. Israel is carrying war crimes in order to maintain its illegal occupation and racist system of apartheid from the river to the sea. The second difference, politically speaking, is while Hamas carries those crimes, war crimes, they are, I'm sorry to use the expression, retail violence, retail bloodshed against the Israelis. Israel's violence, illegal violence against the Palestinians, is definitely wholesale, definitely genocidal, definitely on a great scale of war crimes that ends up, once again, with the destruction of an entire infrastructure for an entire people, where even the International Court of Justice says there's a plausible case for genocide, whereby Israel is destroying a people as a whole or in part, in Gaza, certainly starving them, certainly creating famine, certainly cutting aid, certainly destroying their water and other civilian infrastructure, certainly destroying their schools and universities and their homes, their bakeries, their clinics, their kindergartens, and so on and so forth.
Well, we're waiting to be bringing coverage of a press conference that's going to be held by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's in Qatar. As I mentioned, he'll be joined by Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Qatar, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani. And of course, when that happens, Marwan, we're going to come back to you for your views on that. Thank you very much indeed.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.